Thank you all for joining today's discussion of the Passport session on UN Peacekeeping. I'm Chandrima Das, Senior Director for Peace and Security Policy at the Better World Campaign. It's my honor and pleasure to be participating in this discussion with such esteemed panelists. As you know, UN peacekeeping works. Decades of research has shown UN peacekeeping, when well-resourced and deployed in adequate numbers, prevents civilian deaths and reduce the duration of conflict. We know that it also saves US taxpayers because UN peacekeeping is 8 times less expensive than deploying our own forces. UN peacekeeping demonstrates burden sharing. If we've learned anything from this pandemic, if something happens around the world, it has an effect in our own neighborhood. This is true of COVID-19, but also true for refugee flows, mass displacement, terrorism, and authoritarianism. It's also true when the US stands up for human rights, protection of civilians, and democratic values. It reverberates across the globe. I have seen UN peacekeeping change the course of history by preventing mass atrocities in Central African Republic, to seeing democratic institutions take hold in Liberia, where democratic elections led to a successful transition of power in 74 years. I've also seen that peacekeepers on the southern border of Lebanon have let a generation of children grow up free from large-scale violence. And you know that US currently owes nearly $1 billion in UN peacekeeping dues because over the last 4 years, the US did not pay fully its treaty obligated dues. We know that this has an impact on UN peacekeepers' abilities on the ground. Our partners and allies, like in Ghana, Bangladesh, Indonesia, are not able to pay the tens of thousands of troops that they send to the front lines of peacekeeping. In addition, we understand that resources peacekeepers need, like flights and equipment, are often curtailed or delayed. And lastly, some UN peacekeeping programs are cut due to this financial crisis. I'm heartened to see all of you who know that 90,000 peacekeepers deployed to 12 peace operations serve some of the most vulnerable communities in the world, and they also serve US interests. I'm grateful that you're advocating this week for us to have the US pay its dues in full and on time. Someone else who understands that quite well is Congresswoman Sarah Jacobs. Congresswoman's extensive career in peace and conflict resolution gives her an insider view of the critical work of the UN and UN peacekeeping through her work at UNICEF and UN peacekeeping operations, as well as the US State Department. She did all of this before becoming the Congresswoman from the 53rd District of California. She's a true expert on what it means to have US engagement at the UN. You already have her impressive bio, so I won't go into more detail, but I just wanted to say what an honor it is to have her join today's discussion. Thank you, Congresswoman. I also, I just wanted to introduce Christina Marzoka as well. She's a UNA USA member, and she's the Vice President of the UNA San Diego and a longtime champion of UN's work. She'll be moderating the conversation with Congresswoman Jacobs.
Well, thank you so much, Chandrima, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you to the United Nations Association for the opportunity to join you today. As Chandrima mentioned, I worked at the State Department and at Peacekeeping at the UN and at UNICEF. And now I'm a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. So I feel incredibly strongly that the work that the UNA does is an important counterbalance to a lot of the confusion and misinformation out there about the United Nations. And as one of the youngest members of Congress, I especially appreciate that the UNA has such a sustained focus on engaging and inspiring young people. Unfortunately, many Americans don't know much about how the UN works, but I think that everyone has seen over the last year that this is a small world and has felt our interconnectedness more than ever before. And this is also a pivotal moment for the United States. We have a new president who's made it clear that he wants our country to re-engage with the United Nations system. And we have a new Congress that wants to take our international perspective in a new direction. Now is the time for the United States to return to the global stage as both a leader and as a nation that seeks partnerships and multilateral agreements on peace and stability, climate change, and humanitarian efforts. And a key part of that new posture for the United States is fully supporting UN peacekeeping efforts. We know UN peacekeeping has proven time and time again to be successful, from supporting peace processes in Liberia to supporting stabilization in East Timor or implementing peace in Cote d'Ivoire. But we also recognize that many of these missions face truly complex and deeply challenging circumstances, and they need our support. In the interest of global peace and security, the United States needs to show up again and help ensure that these missions are properly funded and better equipped. And one of the most important ways that we can improve UN peacekeeping operations is to make sure that the United States pays our full peacekeeping dues. You all know, and Chandrima mentioned, since 1995, Congress has capped our annual share at 25%, which simply doesn't reflect our obligations to the United Nations and actively impedes our ability to elevate and lead on our national priorities. The 25% cap has also contributed to long-term problems for UN peacekeeping efforts and actually prevents many peacekeepers from low and middle income countries who provide the bulk of peacekeeping troops from being paid on time, forcing them to shoulder an increasing financial burden. And frankly, the cap is also an annual headache for Congress, which either must pass a waiver or see us rack up millions of dollars in dues. This creates permanent fiscal instability for UN missions. It undermines our global status, and by negatively impacting the success of missions themselves, it creates further burdens and costs for our own government down the line. It's time to do away with this cap and show the world that we believe in peacekeeping. And that's why I'm proud to be preparing legislation to repeal the cap on our peacekeeping contributions. In addition to repealing the cap, my legislation will also call on the administration to work with the United Nations on reforming and improving peacekeeping efforts. We need to ensure that the United Nations works to develop common political strategies among all of the different regional actors, advance a system-wide strategy to protect civilians during and after peacekeeping transitions, and continues to implement performance accountability measures, including efforts to address the enduring challenges of sexual assault and abuse by peacekeepers. The world has changed profoundly since the first UN peacekeeping mission in 1948, and the size and scope of operations is much larger than it was even a few decades ago. I'm proud to represent a new generation in Congress, a generation that is demanding change and demanding progress. Our generation has seen the United States at war for our entire adult life. And across that time, at home and abroad, we've seen people lose faith in domestic and international institutions. That loss of faith has serious consequences, creating new opportunities for bad actors and organizations that don't want peace, stability, and human rights. And the only way to stop this trend, and the only way we can achieve better results, is to embrace reform and change. Making a full and proper investment in peacekeeping is an important step, but I also believe that our own State Department and USAID, and even Congress itself, all need to be better equipped to solve the problems of the future. The United States and the United Nations should work together to protect and empower the world's most vulnerable people, including those experiencing extreme poverty, those living in conflict zones, and those being denied human rights. It's time for the United States to lead on peacekeeping and in promoting these values, and I look forward to working with my colleagues on taking us in this new direction, and I'm so grateful for all the work you're doing to advocate for that. So thank you so much, and I'm looking forward to taking your questions.
Thank you so much, Representative Jacobs, and thank you for your time and for being here today. As someone who's worked for the UN Department of Peace Operations, you have a perspective on UN peacekeeping that many members of Congress just do not have. And for many Americans, the UN peacekeeping mission seems far away and disconnected from everyday life. Why do you think it's important for the United States to continue to support UN peacekeeping operations?
Well, that's such an important question, and a lot of it is simple. Peacekeeping operations make the world safer, which makes the United States safer. And we know that research has shown peacekeeping operations are highly effective at reducing civilian deaths, shortening conflicts, containing the spread of war, and reducing the likelihood of conflict recurrence. And as I think was mentioned at the top, we also know that peacekeeping mission is 8 times cheaper than deploying our own armed forces. So there's also a taxpayer benefit, and supporting peacekeeping operations is an investment in our own future as a result.
Thank you so much. My next question is, many elected officials think we pay too much for UN peacekeeping. And in fact, the United States has built up over $1 billion in arrears to UN peacekeeping over the past 4 years. How can UNA USA members make an effective case for UN peacekeeping as they urge their respective members of Congress to pay our assessed dues on time and in full?
Well, I'm glad you raised this because it's a critical issue to get right. Look, we have to invest in our national security priorities, and we need to meet our obligations to international institutions in which we hope to be part, and particularly the ones in which we want to lead. And frankly, as many of you know, if we don't lead, someone else will. Failing to meet these obligations diminishes our standing and ability to pursue our national security priorities, and it undermines our ability to call for increased oversight and accountability and call for the reforms that I know are important to many of my colleagues. We also have to realize that our actions have consequences on other countries that are actually meeting their obligations. So when we don't pay our dues, we place a financial burden on low and middle income countries and prevent peacekeepers from being reimbursed on time for their courageous contributions. That should not be happening. If we want to maintain our standing in the world, then we have to honor our commitments to the world.
Okay, and my last prepared question was, as someone who has inside knowledge of the UN and is now a lawmaker in Washington, D.C., how would you like to see the Biden administration restore US leadership at the UN and in UN peacekeeping? What reforms should the US be pushing for at the UN in order to ensure that UN peacekeeping missions are able to fulfill their mandates and protect civilians?
This is the critical issue. I think there are a number of reforms that Secretary General Guterres has already prioritized, including strengthening accountability measures for peacekeepers to address the enduring problem of sexual assault and abuse, supporting the full engagement of women in peacekeeping, and implementing a number of management reforms to allow for more agile and effective peacekeeping missions. And it's so important for the US to have a seat at that table and continue to push for all of these initiatives. I also think the US should make it a priority to make sure that there is a shared political strategy in host countries among all the various actors, whether that's regional organizations, member states, or international financial institutions, so that everyone's on the same page and we can synchronize efforts and make the most impact and all pull in the same direction. We also have to make sure that when peacekeeping missions do yield success and are considering withdrawing, that these considerations are based on comprehensive assessments of the conflict dynamics on the ground and risks to civilians, and that we are providing adequate resources for these transitions to maintain the peace and stabilization gains that the missions brought. It is not enough just to have a peacekeeping mission. We have to plan for the day after and make sure that we are resourcing it so that we don't have to send a mission back in a few years later when the peace doesn't hold.
So important to consider, yes. Thank you so much. That's all the questions I have for right now. I'll turn it back over to Chandrima.
Thank you so much, Representative Jacobs, for joining us today. I know that you've got it going, but we appreciate your time and really appreciate your all the work you're doing in support of the UN and UN peacekeeping. And we look forward to advocating for your bill once it's actually been introduced. So thank you again.
Thank you. It was so great to be here with you all.
Well, let me now introduce my UN colleagues briefly, since you already have their bios. Ms. Nanette Ahmed and Mr. Amadou Diallo. I've had the pleasure of knowing Nanette for nearly a decade. She knows peacekeeping very well, and has a huge understanding because she's worked on several peacekeeping missions. Currently, she is responsible for Central African Integrated Operational Team, and she's also in charge of Central and Southern Africa Division within the Department of Peace Operations. She's previously oversaw 5 peacekeeping operations: Mali, Central African Republic, DR Congo, Liberia, and Cote d'Ivoire. And she also lived and worked in peacekeeping in Kosovo and Croatia. And then her colleague, Mr. Amadou Diallo, is actually joining us from Senegal. He's a political affairs officer with the Central and Southern Africa Division and the UN Department of Political and Peacebuilding Affairs and Peace Operations. He supports peace through electoral process in Central African Republic, and has been working to support the MINUSCA mission, the one in the Central African Republic. So thank you both for joining today. And I'll turn it over to Nanette for some opening remarks.
Thank you, Chandrima, and thank you all for being here. I really appreciate, and I always appreciate the consistent and strong support of the United Nations Association. So thank you very much. It's very difficult to follow Representative Jacobs because she's basically explained everything so eloquently, but I will do my best and to take it from a perspective of the United Nations. So I'm going to go through just a brief introduction of peacekeeping, though I'm sure y'all already know this, and just to give a concrete example from MINUSCA, which is the peacekeeping operation in the Central African Republic. And then at the end, offer a few thoughts on the perspectives of peacekeeping. And then Amadou and I will be happy to answer any questions or to share, discuss your views at the end of the presentation. So the UN, as you know, was founded in 1945, and it was really to save the succeeding generations from the scourge of war. Now, UN peacekeeping was not specifically envisaged in the charter, but it's an innovation that takes into account the changing nature of threats to international peace and security. And so the first peacekeeping operation was deployed in 1948. Even during a time when the Cold War often paralyzed the Security Council was able to come together, have a common purpose in order to address a threat to peace and security around the world. Since then, there's been a total of 71 missions deployed around the world. 59 have completed their mandates, and there's 12 currently in place. So we see peacekeeping really as the most concrete expression of the purpose of the UN and its charter to respond collectively to challenges of global peace and security. And by doing so, it gives us this unique global legitimacy and universality. There's hundreds of thousands of colleagues in the field and have been in the field, many of whom have lost their lives in the ultimate sacrifice for peace, many of others who have been injured, but they continue going out there and deploying in order to help effect positive change. There are increasing numbers of women. I saw a question in the chat in peacekeeping. We're not yet at gender parity, but we continue to do our best to reach it. A number of member states provide troops and police. There's 120 now, which is a huge percentage. So it sort of shows a global endeavor. And the majority are coming from Africa and Asia. Our current budget is around $6.5 billion, which is down from 8.3 back in 2015-16 at its peak. And you may think that's a lot, but as Representative Jacobs indicated, as did Chandrima, is that this is a very, very small percentage of what it would take the world to pay for the interventions. It represents less than 0.5% of global military expenditures. And we're very grateful to our contributors, with the top ones, of course, being the United States first, and then Japan, China, Germany, and the United Kingdom. But we really appreciate it. Now, peacekeeping has continued to evolve. It always has changed. Like in the early days, it was primarily maintaining ceasefires and stabilizing situations on the ground. There's lightly armed or unarmed observers or units. And then it evolved over time to interim administrations or transitional administrations when you saw, states breaking up or states going through transition. And now you have a lot of complex multidimensional peacekeeping operations that are responsible for a wide range of tasks from protecting civilians, political processes, security sector reform, and facilitating humanitarian access, among other issues. But there's never one kind of peacekeeping operation. There's always a lot of different ones. But it's always rooted in agreed principles: consent of the parties, impartiality, and non-use of force except in self-defense and defense of the mandate. And these are crucial principles that, of course, the interpretation of which can evolve, but the basis of which do not change. And so it's something that we always endeavor to ensure, particularly impartiality, because while we may be deployed, by the council, and that is not a neutral, endeavor, we are impartial in how we deal with the parties to the conflict. Now, this brings me to MINUSCA and the Central African Republic, which is a large multidimensional peacekeeping operation that runs the gamut of responsibilities deployed in an incredibly difficult logistical and security and regional context. It doesn't have a very supportive neighborhood, so it's made the conflict in CAR very cyclical. And there's been presences before us, peacekeeping and special political missions. And so we enter it at a time when a lot of hope for success, was sort of diminished after all these engagements, but with high expectations. and which I personally feel that we have met them. By and large, almost everyone agrees we prevented a genocide. We contributed to it when we went in 2014. We opened the space for a political process, which led to the signing of a political agreement. CAR has had some of the best elections it's ever had in 2015 and 2020. We've ensured that there hasn't been a coup despite several attempts, and that there's been a peaceful and democratic transition. We also do a lot of support for rule of law and human rights, and to ensure that there is no impunity for perpetrators of human rights violations, and try to build a state that's resilient on its own. Because in the end, it's the people and the state that can prevent conflict. And it's our job to help them along that path. So I think that for each of these areas has really been a huge impact on the lives of ordinary people and of the lives of the neighbor and the region at large. In terms of peacekeeping, peacekeeping has shown that it's very resilient and flexible. It is here to stay. It will change, it will evolve, it will improve, and it should improve, and it should, keep a close eye on its performance. However, irrespective of geopolitical politics or divides, it will continue because it is needed. And until that need goes away, which we all would hope for, peace across the globe, it will be an important international political instrument for peace and security. So I think that I'm going to stop here because I'm sure that there's a lot of questions. I've seen a lot of questions in the chat already, but I just wanted to stress that overall, for me coming in and working at peacekeeping for the last number of decades, I'm not going to say exactly how many, but it's because you can affect change, whether you're working in the field, whether you're working in the communities where you're helping empower youth, or you're helping to craft a political strategy and rally the international community around it, you can really achieve a difference. And it may seem small to us sitting here, but it means a lot to the people who are going through conflict, who are suffering from the implications of it, and who have to face the day-to-day reality of not knowing, whether they and their families will have a future. So for those reasons, I will continue to support peacekeeping and engage in it and do my best to make it the best tool possible. So thank you, Chandrima.
Thanks, Nanette. I know we have some questions. I was gonna just throw out a couple to you and Amadou just as we get started. And then we can go to the chat, and also I'm happy to call on people if they wanna raise their hands so we can get some questions. So Nanette, I'd like to call on you because you are the rare unicorn in UN peacekeeping because you're an American serving in peacekeeping. Having grown up in Texas, what would you tell your friends why UN peace operations matters and why Americans should care?
Okay, well, it's a good question. And I'm happy that Representative Jacobs was very also eloquent, so I'll try to add to her comments, which I fully support, that basically investing in UN peacekeeping is investing in your own security. The world is interconnected. You can say, oh, you can't hear a tree fall in a forest, thousands of miles away, but you will feel the implications from it, whether through flows of population, through restricted markets, through access to resources, through change in the economic and power dynamics. It will eventually, if not directly, but it will have an impact on U.S. interest and U.S. security. It's also the UN peacekeeping is, as Chandrima and Representative Jacobs said, it's a very efficient and effective instrument. More so in certain contexts, conflict or pre-conflict situations, post-conflict, than any other UN instrument. Development is essential and important, and we all agree with it, but sometimes it needs some help in order to have the right environment within which it can take place. And peacekeeping provides that environment. It provides the environment for a political process. And it has achieved a lot of successes, as I had mentioned earlier, whether containing conflicts in the Middle East or preventing conflicts in Western Sahara or in between India and Pakistan, or addressing multifaceted issues such in Liberia and Cote d'Ivoire, whether it was political or humanitarian or development, and getting it on the path to sustainable peace. I think as well, UN peacekeeping is unique in its impartiality and universality and legitimacy. And it really is an instrument of multilateralism, and you can use it to broker international consensus, not deepen it, but broker it. And I think that's a very important role that it can play. And the two last points is the US leadership role. The United States was a leader in creating the UN, was a leader in creating peacekeeping, has been a leader in improving peacekeeping, and has been a leader in sort of the normative approach to peacekeeping, human rights, or protection of civilians, ensuring, the fight against impunity, et cetera. And so that's an important role that the U.S., has played and should maintain. And it's a rallying point as well, right? A lot of times where the U.S. leads, the rest will follow. So it's a very important, legitimizing role. And finally, from a human perspective, people suffer from conflict. We've seen this all over. It is a deep human suffering that lasts generations. And we also have a moral obligation to help other people who are less fortunate than ourselves around the world. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
I want to bring Amadou into the conversation, especially with his work, in Central African Republic. Amadou, as you know, American value is supporting democracy, protection of civilians, and human rights. Your work is so critical in supporting the recent elections in Central African Republic. Can you talk about how UN peace operations helps promote democracy, protection of civilians, and human rights, and why Americans should care about what's happening in places like Mali and Central African Republic and DRC?
Thank you very much, Chandrima, and greetings from Dakar, Senegal. And building on what Representative Sarah Jacobs was saying, and also Nanette, about the interconnection, the world becoming increasingly interconnected, and any nations is actually concerned by threats happening in other places, although those places might be so far. And as you know, in places like Mali and the Central African Republic, the Security Council, which the US is a permanent member, qualified those situations as threats to international peace and security. And I highlight here international, meaning that it's we all are concerned. And second, also what Nanette was saying about the moral leadership. And I'm from Senegal, and when I talk to many of my friends, and when situations are happening, people are asking where the US is standing, whether the US is standing for principles and values, or just keeping silent or supporting the wrong part of the story. And I think this is about also US moral leadership and credibility around the world. And in many places, including CAR and Mali, the US is a top humanitarian provider, the top humanitarian donor. So this is so important. And lastly, also the US is a very diverse country with people coming from everywhere, including from Africa. And I think if I was like a US citizen from Senegal and something bad happening in Senegal and US remaining silent, I will be so shocked. So we people from the global South, we look at the US sometimes to stand up for us and also to be with us in our struggle for peace and democracy and human rights. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So I'm just looking through some of the questions. Well, the first question was, is there insight on what the lack of funding means on the ground from the US? Have you seen an impact on the work that that's happening on the ground? And the second question is, I think this is, how does the AU and UN work together on the continent of Africa? And then if others have questions, please raise your hand or put it in the chat, whatever works best for you. I'm just looking through the participant list to see if there's any raised hands. I don't see any at this point, but feel free to.
I think in terms of the impact of the lack of money on the ground, it affects programs. And as Amadou was saying, is that the United States is one of the largest humanitarian donors to Central African Republic and elsewhere. And the construction of those donations has a serious impact. I know we're talking voluntary, which is different than assessed budget for peacekeeping, but it has a huge impact on the population. It also has a huge impact on the peace process, because the more you have the suffering or inability to address the humanitarian needs of population, makes it much more difficult to address the causes of the conflict in the first place, of which this is often part. In terms of the assessed budget, I have to say that Representative Jacobs and Chandrima has really, eloquently described it in terms of ensuring that the troops and police that are sent by countries to serve the United Nations and under the UN flag get paid. that they do have the resources to do it. Of course, we all know that always budgets have to be negotiated, in committees, et cetera. But it's so important when you look at how down to the bone peacekeeping budgets are. If some of it cannot be funded due to such constraints, it makes it very difficult. But we do recognize that the United States pays an incredible amount of money for peacekeeping, for which, as I mentioned before, we're very grateful. I'm going to start off on to answer on the UNAU, and then I'm going to ask Amadou to take it up because he is our focal point in the team on our relationship with the African Union, which is a priority for the Secretary General, for the Secretariat, and for our boss as well. We have this action, agenda for peacekeeping, and it's a really focus on our partnership with the African Union. Everything that we do in politically in the CAR, we do together with our partners, particularly the African Union, the regional organization ECAS, and that's of course with the European Union. But really with the African Union, they're the linchpin in terms of ensuring a sustainable political process and in bringing on board those countries in the region, the neighbors and others who are essential for any sustainable peace in the Central African Republic. And it's the same in other conflicts. But if that, Chandrima, if you don't mind, I'll hand over to Amadou.
Thank you, Nanette. Building on that, because as you were saying, the complexity of today's challenges, any single organization or country can address them alone. That's why we have to build strong partnerships, working together coherently and in harmony to advance the peace process, because you have several levels and dynamics within the peace process, and we need regional organizations but also regional countries to kind of be so involved, because also they are part of the broad international community and they are part also of the UN. So for instance, in the Central African Republic, the strong partnership between the UN, the African Union, and ECAS, which is a sub-regional organization, and bringing on board also the European Union and other regional stakeholders was so crucial in sending a unified message to the national stakeholders on the need to hold elections timely to prevent chaos in the country. So this is, I think, an example on how partnership can help advance peace.
Thanks, Amadou. And then I also missed a question about how we've increased women in peacekeeping. Has there been an increase? Have you seen that? Can you talk a little bit about the UN's initiatives on increasing women in peacekeeping?
Thank you, Chandrima. Yes, there has been an increase. As I mentioned before, I've been in peacekeeping for many, many years, and I can definitely see the increased number of women in peacekeeping, including in leadership positions. For example, in MINUSCA, the two deputies to the SRSG are women. And but it also comes with effort, right? It's not something that you can just sit back and assume will happen. And so you really have to have continued advocacy, continue ensuring that you put people up and the right people up, women, in these rosters or in the selection sheets. But it's been a challenge, particularly in some locations. But I do see that more and more you can see the impact that they have on peacekeeping. And you can also see it particularly in the uniformed personnel. Now that was an area which was more difficult since, as you know, we rely upon national militaries and national police forces. And so our ability to bring in women as uniformed personnel was reliant upon our contributing countries doing the same within their services. And by advocacy, by training, by engagement, constantly over the years, we've seen a phenomenal increase in the number of women peacekeepers on the ground who have made a difference in terms of engaging on sexual exploitation and abuse, gender-based violence, et cetera. So it's been remarkable. However, that doesn't mean we're where we want to be. As I mentioned before, we still have a long way to go, and we'll keep making those efforts and make it a priority. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say the U.S. is one of the largest trainers of UN peacekeepers. So I think that there's probably a bilateral way that the U.S. could help influence more women peacekeepers. I think we have another question coming in. How has US members increased awareness about the issue on a grassroots level? Radhika, do you want to ask the question yourself? Do you want to come on screen? Well, I will just say, you know, I think that through UNA USA, I think that we've gotten a strong advocacy on UN peacekeeping because of that. So I think that the work that you all do here today and then throughout your time and your districts, we appreciate all the work you have done to bring visibility to UN peacekeeping and the value of the work of UN. I think we have a question from Steve.
Hi, thanks. I'm Steve Watrous from the Milwaukee chapter. We have a number of members who are from Cameroon, a sort of exiled community, and they're very concerned about a conflict going on in Cameroon between the folks that are associated with the English colonial rulers and the French colonial rulers, basically, with terrible loss of life, civilian life, largely. I wonder if the UN or the US can do better on trying to get something going on resolving that conflict in Cameroon.
I will start, but then again, I will hand over to Amadou. We work together, and let me just back up a little bit history. So, because peacekeeping is not engaged in Cameroon, and I know there are a lot of questions about that, but what's happening in Cameroon right now, the UN is engaged through what's called the United Nations Office for Central Africa, which is based in Libreville, and they're responsible for the regional peace and security aspects, of which Cameroon is a very high priority for them. And so they engage in good offices, as well as between the parties with the government and a number of other initiatives in order to sort of promote peace and address those issues. But Amadou, perhaps if you could provide some more details, that would be great. Thank you.
Maybe just quickly also to mention that UN peacekeeping is part of a broad ecosystem, as Nanette was saying, and we have also other presences. For instance, Cameroon is what we call no mission setting. It's not a peacekeeping situation. We have a regional office, as Nanette was saying, covering the whole Central Africa, but also within the country, we have the UN country team with resident coordinators providing coordination with development and humanitarian aspects. Of course, in this context where you have violence, atrocity, even atrocity crimes, the absence of UN peacekeeping sometimes is, could not help us preventing those violence from happening, but at the same, as you know, the UN peacekeeping, it's a decision from the Security Council sending a mission. And in Cameroon, we don't have UN peacekeeping despite the complex situation happening over there.
Yeah, and just to echo what Amadou said, for a peacekeeping mission to deploy, you need a Security Council to vote on it. And unfortunately in Cameroon and Gaza, that hasn't happened. And I think that there is probably a lot of reluctance for a Security Council to vote on those conflicts specifically. I think we have a question from Kaichin Ma.
Yes.
I'm sorry, is that how you, I'm sorry if I messed up your name, so please feel free to correct me.
Thank you, Lady Camille, and honorable chairs and presidents. I'm a student studying at the University of Minnesota, studying criminology and the past genocide with Professor Salzberg, who used to do the investigation of the UN past actions in Darfur and Rwanda genocide. So my question is, for the past failed experience, or unresponsive peacekeeping actions happening in Rwanda and in Darfur, how will the UN peacekeepers use the lesson they learned of the inaction in the future to help to respond to save innocent lives?
No, that's an excellent question, and it's something that we grapple with all the time in our quest to continue to improve. I was actually in Rwanda in 94, 95, right after the genocide. And so I can definitely see the implications from action or inaction. A lot of it is also, it wasn't, I mean, we learned from our mistakes, and also I think the council as well. And if you've seen over time since Rwanda, that the evolution of the mandates, you have much more robust mandates, you know. So I know one of the core principles of peacekeeping is non-use of force, except for in self-defense or in the defense of the mandate. And now you see a much more open interpretation of what in defense of the mandate means. And you'll see in the mandates, it says use all means necessary, right? And that's very, very important in terms of what you can or cannot do. Of course, you have to have the right capabilities to make that meaningful. And that's where we really focus on our performance, the kind of equipment we have, the training that our troops have, and our posture, the willingness and the mentality to want to do something, to engage and intervene. And I have to say, in the Central African Republic, is that you can see that very much at the forefront. It's always been seen as a very robust mission, and it is. It has not come without a cost. We have lost a number of peacekeepers, and it's not always successful. I mean, unfortunately, lives have been lost. And it's difficult in these contexts to protect every life, even though you may want to. However, those as such, you know, very, very horrible experiences in Rwanda and Darfur in some cases has taught us the need to be preemptive, to rely more on early warning and intelligence, to ensure, as I mentioned before, training and capabilities, and to really constantly assess and reassess. Are we getting it right? Is the deployment right? Is there any slippage in our mentality to do it? And we'll continue to improve. But that's also something, you know, that we also rely upon our partners, and particularly the US has been very much engaged in helping us to improve our performance, you know, on these issues. And my final comment on that is our other parts of our mandate, because in the end, the protection of civilians is a responsibility of the state, you know, and the state has to be held responsible. At the same time, you have to help the state be able to implement that responsibility in the appropriate sort of, you know, way, you know, with people first, et cetera. And so it's important if you're going to be having a mandate to protect civilians or having such a robust mandate, you also need to couple it with a mandate to be able to provide the tools and the training for the state itself to assume that responsibility in an effective manner. So I'll stop there. I don't know whether Amadou has anything to add.
Just adding also, in addition to that, in certain contexts, there is also a big dilemma, especially if you have a state itself being a threat to civilians or to certain kind of populations. So in this context, you know, peacekeeping operations are undertaking the protection of civilian mandates in a very complex way. And in certain situations, you have also a hostile host country that is not helping a lot the peacekeeping in fulfilling this mandate. Thank you.
Thank you both. I just we'll probably have to close out in a minute, but I wanted to give you an opportunity for any last minute, you know, comments or closing remarks before we go. But really appreciate you taking the time to engage with UNA USA again, and for speaking to Americans about the work of UN peacekeeping.
No, thank you, Chandrima. And once again, thank you so much to the UN Association. I mean, you're such a staunch and effective supporter. I mean, your advocacy in Washington is unparalleled. So thank you very much. And we'll continue to try to improve. You know, as I said, I believe we're effective. You can always do better, and we'll continue to strive to do so. But thank you very much for your support.
Thank you everyone for joining today.
Thank you very much.